you really do have to kind of put your armor on every single day before you go to the workplace, and you have to be ready. And if you don't respect yourself, if you don't like yourself, no one else is going to.
Today, I'm interviewing Nic Creznic for Finding Purpose's Chapter 1 finale. Nic's post-grad life began with him being nearly homeless to then working his way to a director position in finance and then moving into professional acting. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who supported Finding Purpose during its first chapter. After my pilot reached the top 50% of podcasts, I knew I had to continue, and I'm really excited to move on from JD MBAs and into Chapter 2's new focus on entrepreneurship. I'll be releasing a sneak peek next week. I plan to donate some of the money FP earns on a regular basis to those in economic need. If you'd like to support the show, please check out my Patreon linked in the description below. As a reminder, paid supporters get early access to content, as well as special episodes that will only be offered to paid supporters. Thank you all so much for your support. For now, Nic's JD MBA story has a lot more twists and turns, and I hope you enjoy. I'm joined today by Nic Creznic. Thanks so much for taking the time out and coming onto the podcast today, Nic. I'm excited to talk.
Thank you so much, Josh. First, should I ask, is it Josh or Joshua?
I go by Josh.
Okay. And then just because I'm a name guy, I've got to dive into this for a quick second. This is a Persian last name you have?
Yes. My father's Iranian.
Okay.
I think the root for my last name is, I think it's supposed to be happiness in Farsi, but I'm not a native speaker, so I'm just going off what my dad told me. Thanks again for coming on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what your degrees are, where'd you graduate, that kind of stuff. Just get a little background.
I guess I meet the minimum requirements for this podcast in that I have a JD MBA. I line up with you well in that I have a philosophy undergraduate degree. Beyond that, I guess I was like one class shy of a double major in anthropology. So kind of giving you a hint of like where I was focusing. Thought about med school, but just after the whole JD MBA thing, just did not seem like a good idea. Like I said, I meet the minimum qualifications, but probably like going to get blown away by later guests, but I'm okay with that.
There's no comparison. The whole point of the podcast is just to get different people on with different experiences to kind of show everyone there's a bunch of different routes that you can take on and still be satisfied. So before you started to graduate, or before you graduated, what was the initial plan?
As I think we talked a little bit on our kind of pre-chat, I started getting somewhat apprehensive to very apprehensive around, I guess, junior year of, or I guess the third year of grad school of I did the 4-year program. So I started off as a pure law school student and then joined the business school for a year. And then it was sort of a hybrid for the last 2 years, because I know there's a couple different ways you can do the JD MBA these days. So as I entered my third year, sort of my first hybrid year, I was really aware about the amount of debt that I had racked up. It seemed kind of obvious in law school, at least, that if you weren't in the top 15% of the class, you were all in general admission. You're kind of on your own, and it's not a great look, honestly. Of course, business school is a completely different story. One of the amazing things of the joint degree is that you have, this myriad of options in the business world, even though law also has many, many options, but at times you can get a little tunnel vision looking at the potential legal channels to go into. I'm definitely getting a little apprehensive. I worked all throughout grad school. I worked in the law library for a number of years. I waited tables. I did various things to make money all the time. So it wasn't that I wasn't trying to build up a little bit of income and cash flow and savings, but I learned enough about finance at this point to know how much trouble I was in, essentially, what it comes down to. That's the great irony of business school, right? Or at least for me, at least. I came into it knowing nothing, and like some of the professors will even joke about this. Knowing what you know now, would you really think business school is a good investment? And you look at it and it's like, well, not sure it is. Anyway, I was becoming progressively more aware of the need to figure things out. Not to say I was ready to figure things out or willing to do the hard steps of figuring things out, but I started getting apprehensive at that time.
When you say you were trying to figure things out, Do you mean you wanted to take some time after grad school to kind of let the dust settle and figure out what you wanted, or that you were just questioning the paths that were presented to you in school?
I mean, very, very bluntly, how was I going to deal with 120,000 plus of debt in 2 years?
Sure.
Because that's essentially what the timeline was, and that freaked me out like a big time. My family is not wealthy. I've always been the poorest guy at wealthy schools that my dad has over leveraged himself to send me to, and so I know very clearly the cost of debt and the cost on the family or a family of debt. This became essentially like an all-encompassing fear at this point, and essentially it was boiling down to I need to think realistically about jobs I can get very quickly that will, at least nick away at my debt. And I do not anywhere near have the luxury of having the perfect in career job right at the start. There's just no way I have the luxury of going out there and trying to find the job which is perfectly tailored for my soul and morality. That's just not an option. Am I going to find a job that's will definitely pay me well, but will make me miserable from the start? And from that, I mean, maybe like the military. That was one option ahead of me. Another option was to go into essentially the small circle of banking and insurance people my dad knew back in Kentucky, but that would mean I'd absolutely have to move back to Louisville. And it's a great city, but my experience is if you move there when you're, 18 to 25, you're going to stay there. And I didn't want to do that.
So what did you do after that? So you didn't want to go back there. Where'd you end up?
Well, I did go and start hustling for jobs, the more serious jobs, and so I did actually land myself a clerkship with an attorney in Cleveland. He was awesome, Mitch Alperin. He like almost made me want to go into law. He almost made me want to be a lawyer. Believe me, that's high praise of Mitch. I really never wanted to be an attorney. We can go into that whole backstory, but I never really wanted to be an attorney, and this is really the closest I came. I really enjoyed working for him. It was this great mix of first of all him throwing me deep into cases. There was no real hand holding, and I was doing all the research. I was writing briefs. I was doing real work, and that was awesome. That was a great feeling, and I learned absolutely the most I ever learned in law school from Mitch. The other nice thing about it was I saw the more nuanced and probably less glamorous parts about being an attorney, including billing your clients, managing, let's say, annoying clients. How do you every day productive yet still interesting? Mitch had been doing this for probably 25 plus years, and so if he didn't have a sense of humor or he didn't have a way of making the work interesting, there's no way he would have lasted that long. So he taught me a lot on those fronts, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude for that.
And so
Yeah,
eventually you obviously left. You found out
he
law
offered.
wasn't for you.
Yeah.
Where'd you end up going?
So Mitch actually did offer me a position with him following school, and again I'm very grateful for that. It touched me deeply that he offered that, but I opted for routes less halved out. So I essentially had my old Volvo station wagon packed up to the brim with all my possessions, sitting there on. I don't know what the road is, right? I guess that's probably like, is that what's the road from school straight to downtown?
Euclid?
Euclid, yes. So I had my old Volvo parked on Euclid, filled to the brim with all my stuff. I said goodbye to my parents and my grandmother, and I hopped in and I drove to Los Angeles. So that was graduation day. Um,
Good for you.
yes, and and also just a brief aside, I think I was up till like 5 or 6 in the morning partying with one of my business school friends the night before too. So I definitely was in good spirits when I left on my journey.
That's
Uh,
awesome. It's making that jump when you're still in grad school and thinking about making that jump is probably one of the scariest parts of being a grad student is making a decision that you think is best for you and going with it regardless of what's going to happen. I think the fact that you chose to take that leap in the way that you did, I think is pretty awesome that you were able to do that. And so why don't you tell us, what was that experience like? You moved to Los Angeles and what's going on there?
In Los Angeles, I had my sister. She had moved out there to become an actress. Didn't work out for her, but long story short, she did find a regular position, and so she had a steady paycheck. She had an apartment with her girlfriend at the time, and another girl. They didn't have room enough for me, but they had room on their roof. If you understand Los Angeles or Westwood Village, the specific places, weather, essentially like you're looking at like 60 to 75 every single day, all day long.
Yep.
Uh,
I
and
went.
so,
I was there for undergrad. I lived in Westwood for about 2 years for undergrad.
oh, nice, nice. We were right by Pomodoro's, if you're familiar with that Italian restaurant.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
all
It's
right,
good. It's a good place to be living on the roof of. Not many places you can do that all year round.
absolutely. And it sounds bad on purpose because I'm a storyteller, so I'm trying to make it sound bad. But it was actually amazing. I would go to bed every night with the stars, and I would wake every night with hummingbirds floating around on top of my head. So that's actually the best part of this whole situation. So I was there on the roof, and I did decide to take the bar because so many people in my immediate circle of people that had no idea what they're talking about told me to do that, and so I did. I signed up for the Barbary or whatever the standard course is, and began biking. It was like I think I biked like 5 miles from Aaron's place over to the Barbary Center every day to do my lessons, and afterwards I would go and study a bit and then explore LA a little bit. Long story short, I did not pass the exam, and I was out $3,000 or more. I had just squatted on 2 months of time and destroyed a lot of my goodwill with my sister and other people who she eventually sent me to because she got sick of me. I think I must have couch surfed on like four different couches before I finally landed in an actual apartment of my own. It was definitely intense, and obviously it was not great for studying for the bar. The big lesson for me, I think, and what I'd like to send out there into the ethos is that if you're not committed to being an attorney, please view that money and that time very carefully because it's like in my case it was my only money and my only time, and so it was a precious resource which I squandered in a sense. In another sense, I'm very happy I tried, but like I said, it was a vital resource which I squandered.
And there's no shame in that either. I think that, and I'm not saying that you are ashamed of it. I think that there's obviously a lot of pressure for people to go down that traditional route in the law, and you're obviously aware of it. I think that it's awesome that you tried it nonetheless. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. That doesn't mean you give up or that your situation is hopeless. Because obviously, I've talked to you. I know where you're at, and you're at a much better place now.
Yeah.
And that is where I think the value in the lesson comes. And so now you're in this position where, as you say, you may have not gotten to the place you thought you were going to be, or you may have even wasted some of this time. What happens next?
Pretty much immediately after not passing the bar, or actually, I think pretty much taking the bar because I did not have any delusion that I passed it even after taking it. And so I immediately went to a temp agency. I checked in there, filed all my paperwork. I had worked for a temp agency briefly in Seattle in between undergrad and grad school. And so I was aware of this as a resource, and I knew essentially how easy and again, I view it as a resource because to me, the entire point of a temp agency is that it's going to send you on a number of positions, and it's a very easy introduction from you to the company once you're in the position. They placed me with a company called TCW in like 2 days. So literally 2 days after going and signing all the paperwork at the temp agency, I was trucking downtown to this giant financial corporation. They had one of the biggest skyscrapers downtown, and it was very everyone was wearing suits, and it seemed very important and intimidating. That was my entry, and I got in there in a I think they put me in like a data entry position first, so it was like entering in ROIs and other financial metrics into a database for an investment system. And within, I think, like a week, they hired me on full time at the company. It was a pretty fast turnaround, and it was an excellent introduction to, I don't know the polished way to say this, but it encapsulated the difference between all of the finance I was studying in school and then the actual investing world and the real terms and ideas that I would have to learn and deal with on a daily basis. Whereas all the finance was relevant and helpful, they didn't teach me what like a large cap was, for instance. So I didn't know what a large company was on an index, and everything else, all the other nuances of my position came clear over time. And it was sort of a great survey to investing and great introduction to corporate life, because I don't think I'd ever worked in a major corporation, at least not on a in an office level before. There are real things you need to learn about working in a corporation.
How long were you there for? And it sounds like you had, success there.
I did, and I was there for 2 years until essentially I realized or was advised that someone in my position only gains traction quickly by moving companies. And so I began the process of looking for a new position and interviewing, and I ended up going to First Quadrant, which is a small hedge fund based out of Pasadena. It was a major leap, both in responsibility, but also sort of complexity of the underlying investments, and that's something I wanted. I thrive off of learning things quickly and pretending I understood things very quickly. That was a major value add for me. I quickly learned that the more complex of the assets I was working with, the more competitive I was going to be against the rest of my pool of potential competitors.
A big part of starting out is definitely, I don't want to say grifting, but pretending to know or be more confident in the things that you think that you know or that you don't know and are trying to convince other people that you do know. Again, you found another place that seemed to fit you well. It sounded like finance, was a good industry for you to get into. Were you there? How long were you there for? And, why did you want to move on from that place?
Can I jump on the point you just made real quick? Because I think this is really important. So, yes, pretending like you know things and fake it till you make it is absolutely essential in your career. But the number one thing I see with young people doing this or coming into careers is they act very like know it all and smarmy and cocky. And there's absolutely a way to fake it like you make it or pretend like you know without having any of those attributes. And it's not necessarily easy, and it definitely takes a lot of self control. But that is the number one turnoff I see for young people starting corporations, and especially people, super smart, uh, high achievers coming out of JD MBA programs or CASE or whatever the metric you want to use there. I mean, so it's these people that are absolutely worthy of being cocky, but don't show it. Being able to hold that back and not blast that out to the world is such a sign of maturity. It allows people to finish conversations without you without getting disgusted. It allows people to mention things to you which you half know already, but the review or the nuance helps so much. All these things are things that you shut down when you come with a big attitude. I'm sorry, you're asking what I
So, so you
what
you
changed
were
or
working at that second finance place. You were there for a number of years. Eventually, you left. Why did you leave, and what did you move into?
Well, at first quadrant, I expanded. So at TCW, I was primarily doing what's called RFPs, or requests for proposals. Essentially, for the uninitiated, these are it's used in a number of fields, from government to construction to finance. And essentially, a client will put out an RFP either themselves or via a consultant, and it's essentially a way for a mass number of potential bidders to put forth their best foot, say how they can handle the client's problem the best way. The client can then say, all right, out of these 50 RFPs I received, I want to have a meeting with these 5 people, or I want to invite these 5 people to come to my office and present, and we'll select from these 5 people. It's really quite a cool method of boiling down a lot of information from a vast number of competitors and getting a chance to compare and contrast on a really deep level. Again, something else they never teach you about in business school, at least never taught me. This was my job, was essentially to answer these questions in a way that was always very truthful and would be checked by no short of at least 3 departments, and then eventually potentially the SEC. Veracity is a key attribute, and then on top of that, you need to present your company in the best light possible. A strangely creative place, because it's almost like a reverse marketing material. Like they're asking all these questions about various parts of your company, and you have to sort of come up with like a marketing slide for every question or every idea. Very often, these slides would actually become marketing slides that would go into salesperson's marketing decks. And so, first quadrant became a natural place for me to take on first the hat of putting together these presentations. So I'm going from just answering questions to now presenting things visually, and working very closely, or even more closely, with salespeople. And I expanded into a whole range of other almost strange paths, including at one point I was doing simulations for hedge fund scenarios. So I mean, pretty deep on the math and computing side. I was programming a wiki page, like an internal wiki page for the company. So again, pretty heavy on programming. So I was pushing myself in pretty unusual ways, but without jumping too far back in my past. I mean, these are all things I had done a little bit in the past, and so I was pulling on old skill sets and expanding on them. And at first quadrant, it was a small team of, I think there was, I think, 4 of us initially in marketing, or at least in marketing support, if you will. It was a place where people would allow you to run with any idea you could, and if you had a skill set that you could implement, then no one was going to stop you.
Afterwards, what was next?
After that, I started, I guess, being marketable enough, or interesting enough, that I started getting hit by headhunters left and right. I would say by the second year I worked at First Quadrant, I think my title was, I want to say, I think marketing analytics analyst or something, but still pretty junior. And at this point, I started getting lots and lots of hits from headhunters, and at a certain point, it's like, if so many people are interested in me, why did I like start looking? And that's probably exactly what the headhunters want. I ended up going to a place called Oak Tree, which is a very highly admired private equity and other key asset classes investment firm in downtown Los Angeles. They wanted to place me as a director there, I believe. I think it was a director role. No, maybe it was an associate director. But anyway, it was a big step up, and like I said, everyone knew Oak Tree. It was kind of Goldman Sachs West, if you will, in terms of its priorities. And I was getting paid 6 figures for the first time in my life, which I wanted to bring up with you, because again, I think this is another very important point to put out there to our brothers and sisters. When I applied at TCW, I came in as a data analyst. I was just thrilled that they wanted to, or a data inputter. I was just thrilled they wanted to hire me on full time, and I didn't know anything about the negotiation process, anything about how salaries worked, how career paths worked. So when they asked me what I wanted to be paid, I had this detailed spreadsheet because I told you I was so fearful about paying off my debt. So I had this very detailed spreadsheet that I had spent way too much time on about exactly what all my expenses were, and I do down to essentially the cent what my expenses had to be for the month, and probably within like $100 what they actually would be for the month. So I was very precise in this knowledge, and I was so quite proud of it too.
Oh, I'm
And
the same
so,
way. I love my Excel sheets. I do the same thing with mine.
so here's the key point. Okay, when they asked me what I wanted to be paid, I told them, well, I know very precisely that I need at least 8,500 in order to pay off all my student loans, pay off my rent, spend $500 at the grocery store a month, and pay for my car expenses. Like, I know you're probably impressed that I know exactly that amount. And the next day, I got my offer letter, and they offered me $48,000. And
It's great.
that was the big point of learning there. Don't ask for what you need, ask for what you want. Other than that, I'm sure everyone else is much smarter than me in that arena and can figure it out. The basic takeaway here is that whatever you make in your first job, that's going to be your main benchmark for your second job. Okay. If you hamstring yourself too much on your first job, it's going to have a ripple effect down your entire career stream. Be conscious of that. You're not negotiating just for your first paycheck, you're negotiating for all your paychecks.
That is a good point. I think that's something that doesn't come up very often in class or even in career building exercises at jobs when you're still in school. I appreciate the experience that you have from that. So I know that when we last spoke, you weren't at Oak Tree for too terribly long before you started going into some other stuff that was less finance related.
Yes, yeah, this was the beginning of the decline, if you will. In my, if I was going to title my memoir, that was probably what the title would be. Like I said, I was getting paid an outrageous sum for me. I was in this very enviable position. I shared the office, but I essentially had my own office with one other person who all was also a legal background person, former attorney, I believe, and they had catered meals every day and just every perk you could possibly ask for. On day one, it felt amazing. Okay, it didn't take long for it to feel not so amazing. I was working easily 80 hours, probably closer to 100 hours a week. The person in my office that I was supposed to be partnering with was a total nightmare. She had just every imaginable weird eccentricity you can imagine. It started off with like I can't talk on the phone to my girlfriend at the time because that throws her off of her place and where she's working, and then it just escalated from there until and it was like I can't chew apples. I have to pre peel my apples if I'm going to have apple or something like some insane rule like that. And it was a very hostile relationship, and I got sucked into it. The problem was the person I worked with was very close with the managing director of my department. So literally everything she said went from her mouth straight to the boss. Not even my boss, but my boss's boss. It was essentially like a hostage situation, like from week one. It was absolutely horrible. And frankly, they warned me about this. They told me in interviews that my immediate boss told me about this in interviews that the person I'd be working with was a bit difficult, and the last two people had left somewhat abruptly. And I figured, oh, I'm a tough guy. Frankly, I'd had a couple other nightmare bosses previous to this, which I didn't go into. And so, I figured, what's the harm? I mean, I'm making bank, and where I want to be. It's worth it. I think I was very naive about this, and maybe this is life lesson number three. The political environment is extremely important in any corporation you work in. probably almost any firm you work in, but definitely a corporation. And when you're working in a prestigious corporation, you can bet the corporate politics are going to be at the highest echelon of sniping and backbiting and all these other survivor type ideas.
So, wasn't the best, and you moved on. What did you move
Yeah,
on to?
one of the stories I kept joking about was that the person who left immediately before me was this Russian American young lady who actually I kind of knew from TCW because she was an analyst there. I didn't have a chance to reach out to her, but they were like just brow bashing her, in absentia, and I was like, wow, this doesn't sound like her at all. I worked with her a few times on RFPs at TCW, and she seemed very intelligent, very respectful, and she actually got back to me very quickly on questions I don't understand, and that was like the first like 2 months, and then by month 3 or 4, I got it. I understood why they were making fun of her and why she ultimately left in the middle of the night. She just packed up all her stuff and left in the middle of the night. Didn't leave a resignation letter, didn't leave an explanation, just left. And I got it. And I think around the fifth or sixth month, I was there myself. I had it up to my ears, and I literally went in on the weekend, packed up all my stuff. I did write a resignation letter because I'm very professional. Put it on my desk, and I got the hell out of there. In retrospect, the only big winner out of this whole fiasco was my immediate boss, because what ended up happening was they hauled me back there after I'd already quit. They hauled me back there and to do an exit interview, and I went into HR and I was practically in tears. I was really miserable. I was not sleeping. I was, like I said, I was working close to 100 hours a week. My physical body was breaking down. I had ulcers in my mouth. I had ulcers in my stomach. I had, IBS out the wazoo. I was pretty much like, what is the point? I was reaching a point of like, what is the point of doing this, of spending all this money on a JBA career, of working so hard, putting through myself through all these struggles in order to do this. And so I was, I was probably practically in tears when I did this exit interview. And I told them very bluntly about this situation with my partner and the managing director. And sure enough, in 2 weeks, both of them were fired. So
Wow.
ultimately, like I said, my immediate boss is the big winner there. He got to clean house, and he's probably the managing director at this point. I haven't checked, but I'd be shocked if he's not the MD or higher at this point. He was a triple threat of both having a great pedigree and knowing how to work the system, and also being just a total shark. Kudos to him. But yeah, I left. Because this was a self termination. I had no severance. I had no nothing. But at this point, I had saved up quite a sizable chunk of money, and because of 2008 and the place I was in the economic cycle, I was able to reduce all my debt down to just my federal debt. So I got rid of all my high interest private debt. I got my federal debt down to, I want to say, like the 2.5% interest rate. It was a fixed rate, would never move. So at this point, and since then, I have not paid my debt down much at all, because it doesn't really make sense to take that easy interest rate debt, away first. So I was in a much better place financially, and I had a big chunk of savings and big chunk of 401k, and I was out of a job, but I was in a pretty good place financially, at least. Not a very good place emotionally, and horrible place physically.
Do you know what the just out of curiosity, do you know what the rates are nowadays for the federal student debt?
I have no idea. I'm guessing they're still lowish, probably in the 5 to 7% rate, if I had to guess.
Around like
Um,
7 to 10%, depending on the time and
oh,
the
really?
type of loan. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Okay.
just a little aside for those who
That
are doing their own calculations. It's fun stuff.
that's very interesting. Be very, again, this is one of those things which they don't really tell you much about in school, but also it's kind of hard to force yourself to think about in school, but your debt is a very real animal. The degree which you can keep it smallish and tame is very important. And so I highly encourage you. So, and this again, something I want to jump back to if we can, real quick. In law school, it is obvious whether or not you're going to be in the top, 15, 20%. If you're not in that top 15 to 20% echelon, and you don't have an uncle or a dad or a mom who's an attorney and going to give you a nice, easy position at their law firm, you need to think really quickly and realistically about what your options are, because you're not going to be working at a top tier firm. You're probably not going to be working at a mid-sized firm. If you're working as an attorney at all, it's going to be a smallish firm. And so you need to keep your debt manageable. If you're in JD MBA, it's probably twice that problem. Another calculation in my head about moving to Los Angeles was that if you move to a place that the cost of living is higher, you're going to make a higher salary, and it's going to make the ratio of your salary to your debt more palatable. And I think that's absolutely true. And that's what makes moving to San Francisco or New York such a great option for someone with a high debt load. They're practically giving away, six-figure jobs, because you have to in order to have any kind of money at the end of the month. If you have a high debt, moving to those kind of cities and that kind of industry makes a lot of sense. And again, maybe when you're thinking about all your pragmatic calculations, maybe you think, well, I'm going to have a job I don't like, but is, high paying for the first 5 to 10 years of my career. That's a given. That's the cost of doing business, essentially.
After you finally, you did that super fun exit interview, you volunteered for a little bit, right?
I did. I did a number of things. I was doing this dance class. I think it was called Nia. I just came across that because I was really into this Blacklicious album called Nia, and I was looking up various Blacklicious trivia, which is a hip hop group in Los Angeles. If you don't know, I was looking up Blacklicious trivia, and I found this Nia, and it was like this sort of like kind of like philosophy or almost like transcendental meditation slash dance class. And like I said, I had a lot of stress issues and I need to fix my head and my body, and so I started doing that, and it opened up like a whole new like area of thought for me. The next crazy thing I did was I started doing jujitsu tournaments. I had already been doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu for I think like 3 years, but this was kind of taking it to a whole new level because I was essentially training like an MMA fighter, cutting weight, training every single day. I would wake up and do like an hour workout before I ate, and then I would only eat like I don't know 1,000 calories a day for weeks, if not months on end. And I got down to essentially my high school wrestling weight, and I was feeling fantastic. I had actually healed my body, and I honestly pretty much healed my mind at this point too. And so the next crazy thing I decided to do was to do some improv classes. And so I went over to the Citizens Brigade in Hollywood, and I started doing courses there. As someone who is painfully introverted or was painfully introverted, this forced me out of my shell on to a whole new level. Again, I had done some improv in the past, so I am kind of cheating a little bit in that I'm not addressing my former experience, but this was a big deal for me. I always felt a little bit, ill at ease in corporate settings because I was so introverted, and I always felt disadvantaged especially against salespeople. I'm working with quite a bit, and these people are extremely extroverted, extremely good at talking at nonstop, in your face, no shame, and I felt very intimidated by that, and I felt very intimidated every time I went to interview or negotiate a salary with a boss, because usually my bosses were salespeople. They were extremely skilled at talking and negotiating, and I had no chance. It was really funny. Well, I won't jump too far ahead, but I mentioned you offline. Eventually, when I went back to try to get more finance jobs, Having auditioned hundreds and hundreds of times for acting jobs, interviewing became such an easy thing for me. It became like a total no-brainer to go in and talk to three or four strangers at once. I was so far from intimidated at this point, and
So really quickly, I just want to
yeah,
stop you. You said you had done hundreds of acting.
yeah. Sorry, I jumped ahead in the chronology there. So after doing improv, the next logical step was just go ahead and try to do an acting gig, and so I found one on Facebook, I believe, and I went to this big warehouse building down in Culver City. There was a producer from the television show that I was auditioning for, and like 50 people, and we all stood in a circle. Having had all this improv class experience, I just naturally thrived in this audition. And essentially, what they did was they said, "We're going to throw some ideas out here for characters, and we want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind of what that character would think or say." From an improv perspective, this was like a no-brainer. Started playing with characters, and quickly the circle of 50 people got cut down to like I think like 10, and I ended up getting that very first audition I went out for, which is ultimately probably got me back doing auditioning all the time. I ended up on TV on a show called We the People with Gloria Allred, which was a court show, and I believe I played a Southern gentleman whose wife had bought a horse that was intended to stud, but the horse did not have any testicles, and hence she was suing the seller of the horse on this fake court show. I hope I'm not violating any NDAs by calling it fake. And so I was on national television, acting like a southern jackass, if you will, and it was really funny for me because one of my good friends from law school, Natasha, actually heard or saw me on TV in this like fake courtroom and called me up and was like, "What the hell are you doing there? What is going on? I don't understand on any level what is happening here." So that was really fun.
That's awesome. I didn't know that was the name of the show that you were on. That's so funny. Is it still going?
I don't think so. Gloria Allred is a very famous attorney who represents. She usually represents women that are in these very highly documented cases. So she's. I wouldn't be surprised if she has represented some of the people in the Clinton situation, and I can't remember her specific clients offhand, but like she represents very high profile clients, and she still does to this day, as far as I'm aware. So she had no problem going back to her main career.
I just googled it, and I definitely remember seeing this person on TV. It's the show's a little bit old. I think it's like 10 years ish old.
Right.
But I do remember someone flipping through channels and like, seeing it was one of these courtroom shows, but
Yes.
she was a practicing attorney.
Yes.
Oh, that's so fun. I love that. That's great.
Basically, I mean, the worst thing you can do to me is like show me success on my first try. I'm immediately auditioning for more stuff. I ended up on a few more game shows and other things that got me on national TV. And somewhere in the collective subconscious, I am probably in your head. I eventually got my first real big gig was being on Nickelodeon on Big Time Rush. It's sort of I don't know, Josh. Are they a real band as well? I know they're kind of a fake boy band.
My sister's probably a better person to ask. I know the show. I did occasionally watch it when I was growing up. I I, I want to say no, but I could be wrong. But that's awesome. I know that show, and I know a lot of people my age will know that show.
Yeah, yeah. I think we talked about it, so I knew you were familiar with it. If I'm not mistaken, I think they were kind of like the Monkees, which I know is before your time, but the Monkees were like a Beatle-esque band that was essentially one of the first sort of like artificially created boy bands. They didn't organically come together. They were put together by a record label. I think it was the same situation with Big Time Rush, where they were sort of a produced boy band, and then they had this show. But then, due to their massive popularity of the show, I believe they did actually go to concerts and stuff because I think my fiance's daughter and a lot of her friends actually did go to those concerts.
Huh,
So,
that's
so yeah.
really
Anyway,
cool.
yeah, that's sort of my cultural touch point that most people probably know.
What episode were you in? I have to ask.
I was in season three. I want to say episode one, but I'll have to check. But
Okay.
basically, it's where the boys deal with a French inspector who's trying to find their smuggled cricket. So
Okay.
I'll look it up afterwards and try to send it to you. But
Sure.
yeah, so that was my first really big gig, and then my next really big gig was getting on Clint Eastwood's Jersey Boys as one of the henchmen for Christopher Walken, who played the big mafia boss. So that was another huge thrill for me. I had a couple really good successes in my first run at acting. But as I'm kind of leading up to and foreshadowing beforehand, I essentially couldn't keep it up because I was essentially living off savings at this point. I was not doing any day jobs or any paid day jobs. I did a number of things which ended up eating my savings way faster than necessary, and ultimately, I got to the point where it was going to be a matter of either like driving Ubers or going back into finance. And I just by a small margin I chose to go back into finance.
And I imagine that wasn't an easy decision to make, but necessity calls, and it just kind of has to happen. So you came back into finance. You had a pretty cool acting career. I know that the bug eventually came back to you, but before we get to that, how long were you back in finance for?
A pretty long time, really. I think 5 years in total on my second stint, maybe five and a half even. I was very nervous about going back into finance because of my acting career, only in that I had this thought in my head that people were gonna make fun of me for it and like go on to my Facebook or YouTube or whatever materials I had posted some, acting gigs on, kind of tease me about it all the time, just because I knew again how awful people in finance and corporations can be. Ultimately, no one knew or cared at all, including the people I interviewed with. And I even kind of, I explicitly mentioned some of my entertainment careers and positions, and no one cared. And I ended up coming back as a director, so essentially an upgrade in my role and title. I got paid what I got paid at Oak Tree plus some. It's kind of crazy. It was like kind of mind blowing. I was going back or expecting to go back in a very humbled and hobbled position, but ended up being even better when I went back.
That's awesome to hear. Finding that success after a lot of highs and a lot of lows, I'm sure it was very nice to see, I'm sure. Did it change the way that you viewed work in general?
It did. I mean, if I didn't already think that was all one big game, that being interviewing and auditioning and frankly most of your career, I certainly thought that at this point. It started taking on all new levels of hyper realism, and it almost went more from being Kafkaesque to being more like, oh, how can I manipulate this ridiculousness to my advantage? And so I guess it was a good thing in many ways that I had seen just the malleability of my situation. Going into this, I had really told myself I wasn't going to abuse my body, my mind the way I had in the past, and I'd say for like a solid 2 years, I didn't. I really did a nice balance of. I actually sold my car and started biking to work. And I think it was like 6 miles each way, and there was a gym at work, so I could go in and shower, and I didn't have to, do the Superman changing in the stalls like I did at TCW or at First Quadrant. And so that was good, not being made fun of by the CIO as he walked into me, throwing my jeans over the stall. So it was like I had reached sort of this very West Coast or New York kind of like amazing hybridization of being like the this kind of ubermensch of I've got my physical strength, but also my I have a good position, and I wield some authority. I'm making really good money again, and everything's going great, and everything felt great, honestly. it took about 2 years for that to unravel, and to me to get back in this same kind of situation where I'm putting in massive overtime, and of course I don't even get overtime pay anymore, because one of the effects of getting a higher salary or getting a higher position is that you usually become a salaried worker and you're no longer getting overtime, which is another real thing to think about, because I know people that have worked in this industry for 20 years and still get paid overtime, even though they're making $200,000-300,000 a year, and when they get overtime, it's very lucrative. It's a weird little quirk, and maybe it's not relevant for many people, but for those who it is, I would definitely be savvy to that, and don't underestimate the power of overtime, and don't let this become a little ego trap where you're afraid to be in a non-salary position because of how that looks. I mean, think about the finance and financial impact, not this optics.
Yeah, I think that ego is one of the big things that people that I've spoken with who've gone to law school or MBA school or some combination thereof talk about as a constant in their lives. It's just something that, I mean, I think in the first week of law school, they tell you that, you're all probably used to being one of the smartest people in the room. Well, now that's everyone around you. And so they breed that in at a very early age in your legal career, at least. And it's very easy for, I mean, I even felt it myself. It does color the way that you view your job and the other aspects of it. And it can definitely detract from what you're doing and just the happiness that you get from it. So for you to find that and figure that out, it wasn't something that you just figured out at one point and you knew for the rest of your life, right? You've come back and forth with this several times during your finance careers. And I guess my point is, it seems like it's an ever learning process. You're never going to be at that point where you just know everything.
Right. And this is a great circle back that we talked at the beginning of the podcast. Ego is so important. Through acting, I've learned to use it as a resource, and to not view it negatively at all, but to know essentially how to switch it on and off fluidly. Just always know what amount of ego to dial up for what situation. And just to give you a quick example, I mean, when I was working at most of my jobs, I'm not going to lie, I felt like I was the smartest person in the room. I was also, if not, I was probably, close. I was low or the lowest politically powerful person in the room, but I had this like sort of internal smugness that, well, I may have no say in matters, but if they could hear what I had to say, they'd be impressed. And so there's that element. So part of what I had to do many times was really pump my ego up, just to keep myself mentally healthy, or mentally just to survive, quite frankly. Ego sometimes is like a life raft to some degree, and you kind of have to do that Al Franken thing where you say, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, to yourself in the mirror every morning, because you really do have to kind of put your armor on every single day before you go to the workplace, and you have to be ready. And if you don't respect yourself, if you don't like yourself, no one else is going to. That's my
Yeah.
hallmark PSA for the day.
So obviously, you left finance again after a certain point, after you were kind of done with that grind of working overtime and not being paid for it, and everything we just mentioned. Where did you go afterwards?
So I left again. This time, I at least had the good sense to get a massive severance package when I left. So I had the luxury of not really needing to work at any time soon when I left my position. At first, I was in no hurry. I was literally just in the backyard gardening for 8 hours a day, and writing my novel that I wanted to write forever, messing around with any other hobby or inkling that I had, and it was amazing. I went from having absolutely no time for myself to having almost an unlimited amount of time for myself. And okay, right, another life lesson coming here. I also had almost unlimited time for my girlfriend. And probably the only reason she's now my fiance and not my ex-girlfriend, is because I had this major shift in my attitude towards her. And I started realizing that, I frankly had no excuse not to help her whatever she needed and not to be there for whatever she wanted, whether it's a movie which I marginally cared about, to go seeing a friend who I didn't like or I liked but had no commonality with, to just helping her with her work or whatever. I always had this attitude before that I was super busy at work. I was super stressed out. She had no right to ask me to take any of my time, for her when I was barely hanging on by a thread. And so this was a fantastic shift in my behavior and my attitude. I would highly recommend people take some sort of, strong looks in the mirror at periods within their career, early on in their career, to say, how much of my overall time, outside of sleeping, outside of necessity, am I giving back to my loved ones? Because if you're only giving it back to yourself, then that's the only person you're going to have at the end of the day.
Sage advice. It's hard to conceptualize that right now just because I am still so early on, right? In my career, I haven't even finished school and I won't for, God, it feels like forever, even though it's only going to be a few more months. But that's something I think that a lot of people would feel uncomfortable with, namely taking that time off from a position that is fiscally sound to do all of those things that you just talked about. Because we don't currently live in a world that promotes that as something that's just virtuous or good to do, right? It's all about making the money, getting the title, getting the career. And for some people that works for them and that's great. And for some people it doesn't. That's really why I wanted to do this podcast, is because I think that there are different ways to live one's life. And why I am specifically talking to JD MBAs for right now is because there's just so many different things that you can do with these degrees and in life in generally. The whole point is just to say there's no right answer. And even if you think that it's a waste of time, that what you're doing is meaningful. And for you, that you found your happiness with it. And I think that's awesome.
Thanks so much, Josh. And I really appreciate the chance to come on your podcast. It's just so great for me to speak, in a sense, back to my younger self, via everyone else. And so I hope the things that I've said make some sense, or at least will make some sense someday when they, face these same sort of struggles that I have. And I hope people can, not make the mistakes I have. And if you're really hard up for content someday, we can do a follow-up on this and talk about some of the big mistakes I did make and go into greater detail on those if you'd like.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Thank you for tuning in to Finding Purpose's Chapter 1 season finale. We want to give a special shout out to our Patreon subscribers for their ongoing support. If you enjoyed this episode, you can connect with any of our guests on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@Finding Purpose Podcast, where you'll find full episodes as well as some interesting clips from each episode. If you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, please reach out to us at findingpurposepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Finding Purpose.